Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Tim Tukawingwa. My name is Tim. If you don't know me yet, in my day job I work at the University of Otago. For years I have taught the history of Christianity. I also have a new role of leading the university's strategy on learning and teaching. In my family life I'm married to the lovely Kate, and we have 4 boys, only one of whom is still at home, so they are growing up. And lately I've been thinking quite a lot about the universe for reasons that will soon become apparent. I'm sure that all of us at some point will have gone outside at night, especially if we're outside of the city with its streetlights, and we've looked up into the sky and we have seen all of those stars. You just see a huge, huge number of stars above us. Well, what I've learned is that we do not see a huge number of stars above us. We see an utterly inconsequential number of stars above us in the context of the universe. This, you might be wondering, is a photo from the Hubble telescope. What is in that photo, prepare yourself, is 100,000 stars out of the 10 million stars in the star cluster known as Omega Centauri. All right, 100,000 stars out there in just that little wee fragment of the universe. Let's keep going. So, there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy, the Milky Way. Right? So when you look up in the sky and you see that wash of stars, particularly across the middle of the sky, that's the Milky Way. We're in it. It's our galaxy. There are 100 billion stars in it. But how many galaxies are there in the universe? There are 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. Right? Be careful. Your mind is about to spin out. There are approximately that many stars in the universe. That's 23 zeros. That's stars. Our sun is a star, right? A star generates its own light. That's a star, right? Well, and then, don't forget, there are probably more planets than stars, right? Do you get a sense of what we cannot see out there? Amazing. Yet in all this immensity, there is only one place we know of where life exists, and that's here. Amazing stuff. Well, how big is it? Well, here's another photo from the Hubble telescope, this one showing not just stars, but also the gases of the universe. The most distant objects in the universe are 47 billion light years away, which makes the size of the observable universe 94 billion light years across. Now, what's a light year? A light year is the amount of mileage that light will travel in one of our Earth years. Try and get your head around that. Okay, so the sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth. It takes 8 minutes for the light to reach us from the sun. Light travels around 6 million miles in one Earth year. That is a long way, right? That is a long way. Well, the universe is, at least 94 billion light years across. Now, you might come up to me afterwards and say that you can get your head around those figures, and I'm sorry to offend you, but I will just laugh, because our minds cannot deal with that. That is size on an incomprehensible scale. That is a magnitude of reality that is absolutely beyond us. Not only that, the universe is expanding. So, the universe is expanding, as I just said. Its constituent galaxies flying apart like pieces of cosmic shrapnel in the aftermath of the Big Bang. Right? So it all started with a Big Bang. God spoke, everything came into being, and from that little wee bit of everything, it all expanded outwards. It's still expanding. It's still going, right? So what I just gave you, that figure, that's the observable universe. There's more. And wherever it ends, it's still going. It's still expanding. And here's my question. What is it expanding into? Explain that to me, right? Somewhere around 50 billion light years that way, yet there's the edge of the universe, and just beyond that, if you could freeze that moment in time and space, beyond that there's something that's not the universe. What is that? I have no idea. We have no idea. But the universe is expanding, and more to the point, the only force operating should be gravity, which acts like a web of elastic between the galaxies, slowing them down. But in 1998, contrary to all expectations, astronomers found that the expansion of the universe is actually speeding up. That makes no sense. The energy should be depleting. The things should be slowing down. But they're not slowing down, they're speeding up. Why? How is that happening? We have no idea. Dark energy is our best answer, and we don't even know what that means, nor can we see it, nor can we register it. It's beyond us. Now, the universe has not existed forever. It was born. All matter, energy, space, and even time erupted into being in a titanic fireball called the Big Bang. So here's the other big question, right? If there was a moment when the universe began, what was there before it? And if time itself began in that moment, then there are no moments. So how does that work? Now, any one of us, anyone in the world, has only two choices on this point. There are only two. It's binary. There are no other alternatives. Either the universe was created, or it created itself. Either the universe was created by God, or it really did just appear out of nothing one day from nothing. Now, both of those propositions are entirely reasonable and rational. But both of them require a great amount of faith. It takes faith to believe that the universe that we can see, though admittedly we can see only about 15% of it, right? The rest of it we just don't see, can't register. The universe that we can see was created by a God we cannot see. That takes faith, right? But to my mind, it also takes faith to believe that in a universe that relies on the principle of cause and effect, there was, on this occasion, an effect, but no cause. That takes faith. So there's no way around it. Faced with that choice, it takes faith. Now, while we're thinking about reality, let me introduce you to a piece of technology that hadn't quite reached the psalmist. Let's think for a moment about the microwave oven. How does the microwave oven work? Well, it uses, wait for it, microwaves. And what those microwaves do is that they make water molecules in the food vibrate. And as they vibrate, they rub up against each other, and that friction creates heat, right? So, how many times a second do you think those water molecules vibrate? Have a think. This is a rhetorical question. You don't have to shout it out because you'll embarrass yourself. How many times do you think they vibrate in a second? Ready for the answer? Basically, microwaves cause water molecules to go into a vibrant dance, flipping back and forth some 2.45 billion times a second. That is an astounding number. Just think about what that means. Think about what that means about the nature of reality. It is theoretically possible to observe that molecule go up and down 2.45 billion times a second. It's possible. It must be possible because it happens. That little molecule is doing that 2.45 billion times a second. That's a lot. If you want to feel for the magnitude, well, a human lives for about 2.45 billion seconds. So imagine a water molecule oscillating as many times a second as you have seconds in your life, right? In other words, between now and now, there's a whole lifetime for that molecule, a whole lifetime. So, think about this. The next time you are heating up last night's spaghetti bolognese and daydreaming about what you're going to have for dinner, while you're doing that, the molecules in your food are vibrating 150 billion times. So you might think that the microwave oven is merely a kitchen appliance. It's not. It is a sobering reminder of our utter inability to register what is really going on around us. We have no idea. It is beyond us. The humble microwave is testament to our human finitude, our finiteness, our limitedness, our dullness. We just have no purchase on reality. When you think about the sheer number of stars that are out there, when you think that somewhere in that direction, 50 billion and more light years away, the universe is expanding, we have no idea. No idea. But here's the point. God does. God does. By thinking about the universe in this way, it just helps us inch a little bit towards understanding the magnitude of who God is. Because God created this universe. Therefore, God stands outside of it. And it makes no sense for me to say this, but I'll say it. However big the universe is, God is bigger. If the universe were to keep expanding for an infinite amount of time, it would never get past where God is. And that really does make no sense, because God is not similar to the universe. God is outside of it. God is not just a bigger, better, cleaner version of us. He is utterly other. And he is outside of space and time. And this gives us just a little bit of an approximation of what is meant when the scriptures speak of God as holy. He is utterly other. He is utterly above us. Now, this matters because what is this God like? Because if this God is vicious, if this God is sadistic, we are in huge trouble. If this God created us for evil purposes, there is nothing we can do about it. Even if we all ganged up together, all humans just piled on top of one another and then piled on God, that's just piling nothing on nothing. That is nothing squared. You start with nothing and you end with nothing. It's pitiful to think that we could go up against God. We are utterly at his mercy. So it makes a difference who this God is and whether this God is for us or against us. The good news that I have for you this morning is that this God is for us and not against us. Now, there is a word that's used in the Psalms, Selah. It means to pause and calmly think, take note, because whatever has been said, it's important. And I've given you a lot to think about. I've given you a lot of numbers, a lot to get your head around, and I'd just like to take advantage of this concept and just pause. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and for 60 seconds, I'm going to let you reflect on all that. And then in the midst of that silence, I am going to read to you our prayer for the morning, which is Psalm 8. Close your eyes and just reflect on the universe we're in. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You may open your eyes. That's Psalm 8. It's the only psalm of praise that speaks entirely to God and serves as a fitting prayer, I think, for us this morning. And its beginning, I think, is consequential. Lord, our Lord. When you think about the God that I won't say I've described, I've indicated, I've hinted at, because who can capture that? When you think of that God, there is no way that we can think about that God as ours. There is no language that we could rightly use that could imply any sort of possession of that God, unless God had graciously given himself to us. And what this psalm orients us to is a God who does exactly that. This is a God who graciously gives himself to us. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. And I guess that humans and God's people have been doing this for centuries, what we have all done in the night sky, especially in a pre-industrial world without electricity and unnatural light, have looked up into the stars. And even though we know that's only an infinitesimally small number, still have a sense of their place in the universe. And it's small. They have a sense of just how small they are in the scheme of things. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place. It's metaphorical, of course. This God who created the universe does not have fingers. But you get the sense all of this is his handiwork. All of those stars, all 21 followed by 23 zeros, all of them set in place by God. This God who, if he wanted to, could count them, actually knows how many there are, where we can only guess. This God, when you consider this God, what are we? Who are we? What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. Really, we're nothing. We're fluff. And yet, consider what this verse says about God. He is mindful of us. He cares for us. And us there is not just his people. This is not just the people of Israel for David, the psalmist. This is for all humans. God has a care for humankind. God is mindful of us all. It's astonishing that this God who exceeds the universe on an order of magnitude we cannot begin to conceive is mindful of us and cares for us. That is incredible. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and animals of the wild, the birds of the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Look at what God has done for humans. He has given them this place in creation, just a little lower than the angels and ruling over all other creatures. Having dominion, given dominion over creation, this earth. And in another sermon, not this one, I might talk about that and talk about dominion not being domination and talk about how we have ruined our stewardship of the earth we've been entrusted with. But that's a sermon for another time. But just note what the psalmist has here, a vision, or God's vision for humanity, just a little lower than the angels and over everything else, everything under our feet. Now, if you're paying close attention, you might notice two things. First of all, not all things are under our feet. We are not safe and secure in this world. We're really quite vulnerable. So something in the vision that God has for humanity has not been fulfilled. Something about our existence on this earth, in this universe, has gone awry and got in the way of God's vision for humanity. The second thing that you might notice is that I missed a verse on the way through. It's verse 2. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. Now, that's interesting. What's interesting to me is that that verse is even there. Because if it wasn't there, we wouldn't miss it. We really wouldn't. The psalm actually flows more coherently without it. This verse interrupts something that's really going quite nicely. And I think, why is that? Why is this verse there? That's my first question. Here's my second question. This God who created everything and sits above it has enemies. How does that work? How does God have enemies? This God can't have enemies. And again, we've got only two choices. Either there are enemies who are stronger than God is, well, that makes no sense. Or, for his own purposes, God has ordained space in which enemies may arise. In other words, it's another hint that something hasn't gone quite right. Something's gone awry. Something's not as it was intended to be. And what is it that puts that right? What is it that silences these enemies? What would you think would silence some enemies? I would think a big gun might do it. You know, a weapon of some sort. Some big hammer. What silences these enemies is the praise of children and infants. How does that work? And I think that hints at something really important. That the making right of what has gone wrong will happen in a way that we simply would not expect. That there is an upside downness, an inside out, to the way in which this God will work his purposes to their fulfillment. Because you better believe it, if God has a vision for humanity, he will fulfill it. I mean, the idea that this God could have an idea in his head, a vision of where things should be and how they should be, and then we humans, because you know the story, we got in the way, it comes down to us and our poor decision-making, right? The idea that we could somehow get in the way of the fulfillment of the vision of this God for his people, I don't think so, right? So he's going to fulfill his vision. But how? It's the how. That's so interesting. And it's not what you'd expect. It's not what you'd expect. So, what are we to make of this psalm? I tell you, really, an interesting way to think about not just the psalm, but the series we're in, is, how did the first Christians make sense of the resurrected Jesus? Right? Jesus was dead, and then he was alive again. That was completely outside of their frame of reference. What they did was to go back and rethink their frame of reference. They went back into what we call the Old Testament. And they worked with it all, but there were a few books in particular that they worked with. There was Deuteronomy and there are the Psalms. Of course, last year we worked our way through Deuteronomy, and right now we're selecting a few Psalms to consider, right? Those choices are not accidental. These point us to Jesus. Psalm 8 points us to Jesus. Psalm 8 points us to the fulfillment of the vision that God has for humanity in Jesus. And Jesus is not what we expect. Jesus is not the big hammer, at least not yet. And one writer in the New Testament who thinks about this very carefully is whoever wrote the book of Hebrews. So the letter of Hebrews in the New Testament is written to Jewish believers who are under real pressure and persecution for their faith and tempted to give away Jesus and go back to what they once knew, to that old frame of reference. So the letter is written to encourage them and urge them and warn them to stay the course. And this is how it begins. It tells us something very interesting. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. We might reflect on that in light of what we've just heard about this universe that we're in. Jesus created it. He is the word that was spoken. And he sustains it. Let me make a statement of faith that at some level, whatever it is that is causing the universe to expand more rapidly and not less, I think Jesus is the answer. I think he's kind of messing with us, right? Like, I know that this place should be slowing down, but let's have some fun. Let's make it speed up, right? Because there's a relentless new form of energy that's making that happen. Where does that energy come from? But Jesus, who sustains the universe. And now, let me throw out the greatest mystery and magnitude of all. This God who created the universe became one of us and inhabited a human body just like yours. Talk about the unexpected. So moving on to chapter 2, this is where Psalm 6 comes in. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come. You know, angels are good and we're just below the angels, but they're not getting this future world. It's Jesus. Jesus will rule over the world to come. He will. But there is a place where someone has testified, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man, singular, that you care for him. You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. And putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them, but we do see Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of the psalm. He quotes the psalm, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, just for a time, just for a few years, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. This is also incomprehensible, that the God of the universe would choose to inhabit a human body. Talk about a God who gives himself graciously to us. And not just takes on human form for a few years, but whose life on earth ends in the most brutal and excruciating fashion by execution on a cross through death. Who would ever have thought that this God of incomprehensible power would bring about the fulfillment of his vision for humanity through death? But that is exactly what has been done. That is exactly what the resurrected Jesus speaks to us. This is how God has spoken in these last days through his Son. Now, not everything is under his feet or our feet, but there is a world to come. Jesus will come again in judgment. Jesus will come again, and he will put to an end that sphere of operation for the enemies of God, because that is intolerable. And the question for us is whether we will stand on the right side of that judgment. And we can stand on the right side of that judgment only when we stand in Jesus. And that is what these Hebrews needed to hear, because they were tempted to give it all away. So what are we to do with the psalm? I want to bring back into our minds what Philip spoke to us right here at the same time last week when he worked through Psalm 2. And he gave us what I thought was a really powerful challenge to think about. We're here, but do we want to be here? Really? Are we here because we love Jesus? Or are we here because it's kind of, we have to? We have to put on a good show. It's sort of obligatory. Deep down, if we really had a choice, we'd rather be somewhere else, but we're here because we have to be. That's such a good question. That was a challenging question for me to hear. And I wonder if it was a challenging question for you to hear. And I think it's a question worth repeating, not just because it's such a good question, but because it also fits with what I think the writer is doing with Psalm 8. And Philip asked us to consider what it is that we really love. Because he had noticed, and you will have noticed, those people of the faith who one day they're just not there anymore. Turns out, really, when you get down to it, they loved something else. They wanted something else. I think our consideration this morning of the universe we're in puts those other loves in perspective. However important they are to us in our level of reality, in the scheme of things, they are inconsequential compared to the God who created the universe, who sustains the universe, and one day will bring the universe to a close. And if you were challenged at all by Philip's question last week, and then did nothing with it, that's worth paying attention to. That might tell you something. And if you are resolved actually this week to do something about it, and he encouraged us to sit with a very good worship song that will draw us to the praise of this Creator, if you have it in mind to do that this week, then I encourage you to let someone know so you have some accountability about that. What is it that we love? What we have seen this morning is a God who revealed himself as Jesus, as one who is mindful of us and who cares for us. If you're honest, how much care and love and mindfulness is there in your own heart towards Jesus? That is a super challenging question. And fortunately, we have some space to reflect on that for ourselves as we take communion. And I'll hand over to Philip.